Chapter 10 of Hunters Out of Space. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Elliot Miller. Hunters Out of Space by Joseph E. Kelliam. Chapter 10. Ato's probing instrument still pointed the way to Aldebaran. In a surprisingly short time, the warning signals were flashing and jingling throughout the nebula. There was that same sick feeling as it moved slower than the speed of light. And there was a glowing sun with 9 planets circling stately about it. Slower the nebula moved, and slower, until the outermost planets sparkled in the light of its sun below them, and they swooped down. Not a single blast was fired at them. Every man was at his post, while Ato guided them in and Odin worked the screens. Once more, Jack was disappointed. He had looked forward to some alien, even exotic civilization. Here were fields and streams, and there were cities, looking very much like the cities of his world and of Opal. Those other worlds which he had seen had been blasted, so there was no way of knowing how their cities had looked. But these were too recognizable. He was certain he had seen several of the taller buildings before. Was space no more creative than this? Had the worlds dedicated themselves to the same monotonous pattern? Had he caught a glimpse of conventional, rocket-shaped spaceships plying their courses back and forth among the planets? He saw boats and cars, and a few long-nosed airplanes, with the merest trace of vestigial wings far back near the empennage, streaking through the sky in high arcs, leaving curling trails of fog and smoke behind them. But there was little here that his world had not already mastered, or at least had on the drawing board. The nebula came to rest upon a bare plain not far from the nearest city. As he turned to the scanner upon it, Odin saw that while it looked familiar enough, there was one exotic thing about it. Toward the outskirts of the city, in the bend of a wide river, was the Taj Mahal. He felt nearly as bewildered as he had been when Nea explained her theories of time-space concept to him. They had hardly landed before one of Ato's scientists announced that there was good clean air outside. Oxygen and nitrogen with good old water held as moisture within it. The city sat there upon the plain and stared at them. The nebula looked back. At length a procession of cars moved toward them. Grim Hagen's voice came thundering over the loudspeakers. "A truce, Ato. I offer you a week's truce in return for a few meetings. This world has seen enough destruction." Gunnar and his crew leveled their death gun at the advancing party. Odin kept them on the screen. Ato and a few of his captains got ready to disembark. As Odin watched, he kept puzzling over that voice. It certainly was Grim Hagen's, but it was different. Perhaps it was a bit lower, perhaps a more commanding. But there was just a bit of weariness in it. And the answer came to him suddenly, although he never knew why. The voice was older. Then Grim Hagen and his staff were below the nebula. They were dressed in white and gold uniforms. That was not surprising either. Ato and his men advanced for a parley. Odin watched and listened. At first, he could not get a clear look at the man for Ato's broad shoulders. Then Ato turned aside and Grim Hagen's head and shoulders filled the screen. Odin gasped in amazement. Grim Hagen was nearly 20 years older than when he had seen him last. The shoulders and arms were larger, although there appeared to be a little fat upon Grim Hagen. The dark hair was streaked with gray. The face was seamed, and though the black eyes still blazed, they now burned with the fanatic hate and desperation. Where pride and ambition had once made a face coldly handsome, there was now nothing but seamed lines like scars and blazing eyes. It was an evil face. Grim Hagen had become a devil. Hagen looked at the much younger Ato and laughed. "So the cub comes to fight with the tiger. Didn't you know? Didn't you guess? While you came galloping after me, I had already landed within this system. And time began its old alnage. These were a peaceful people and we wrecked them. We enslaved them and built the 9 worlds into our own fashion.
Nearly 19 years, Ato. No Caesar ever dreamed of a larger kingdom. I even gave them a new goddess, for I did not want them to do much thinking. Yonder." He pointed to the duplicate Taj Mahal in the distance. "She sleeps. My only failure. No older, and sometimes I go back there and look at her, and my youth seems to walk beside me." "We want the people that you brought with you, Grim Hagen," Ato answered coldly. "And the treasures." Grim Hagen laughed again. "Those that came with me willingly are dukes and kings beyond their wildest dreams. Those who would not take oath to serve me are still slaves, except for Maya, who sleeps. As for the treasures, my treasure houses are so full now that I doubt if I could separate one thing from the other. So youth grows old. But you must admit that this is better than cringing in a hole in the ground." "None of us cringed unless it was you," Ato retorted angrily. "We have come beyond time and space. For Maya and her friends, for the treasures, and for you." The mad light flamed in Grim Hagen's eyes as he laughed again. "You could not get 1,000 feet into the air unless I permitted it. Come now. I have given a week's truce. Relax and enjoy yourselves. After all, we are kinsmen in a far country." He rubbed his chin thoughtfully and repeated, "A far country." 3 days had passed since they had landed on Grim Hagen's planet. Ato, Gunnar, Odin, and a score of others had gone into the city, where they had been given quarters in a palace that made Windsor look like a second-class lodging. Odin and Gunnar shared a suite. As he dressed that morning, Odin looked about him at the splendor. Every bit of woodwork was hand-carved. The walls were covered with frescoes. The chandeliers were jeweled masterpieces, and the carpets were thick crimson piles. The lace curtains must have ruined the eyes and hands of a dozen women. He had heard that the planets of Aldebaran had been peopled by a blond, peaceful race, who were on par with the culture of the Middle Ages when Grim Hagen arrived. Lord, how he must have worked himself and them to bring them this far along in 19 years. There was a peaceful air of prosperity about the planet, and trade, he understood, was flourishing with the outer worlds of the system. But the people were no more than slaves, beaten and cowed into submission. Oh, they worked hard, but Odin wondered what had been their punishment in years past for not working. There was something in their eyes, a stunned, unhappy look, that made him wonder what would happen someday when they learned as much as their masters and turned upon them. Moreover, he had been told that the planets were overcrowded when Grim Hagen arrived. They did not seem so now. How many graves throughout those 9 planets were dedicated to the conquerors? Only once had he seen one of them mistreated. That was at a dinner the night before. The banquet hall had been a combination of medieval, modern, and bronze splendor. The dishes, the food, and the music had been superb. But a fair-skinned girl had spilled a few drops of wine when she was serving Grim Hagen. His face had grown dark. Half arising from his high-backed chair at the end of the table, he had doubled up his fist and struck her below the cheekbone. She reeled back, her face crimsoning from the blow and the shame. The other servants pretended to see nothing, but in the girl's eyes and the eyes of the others he saw the old promise that had been written in the eyes of slaves since time began. Someday. Someday. Then, with perfect calm, Grim Hagen had sat down, wiping his lips with a lacy napkin. "Pardon me, gentlemen, but they have so much to learn in so short a time." Then he looked down the long table at Odin and could not resist one jibe. "You don't know how happy I was to find that these planets were peopled by a light-skinned race." That was all. True to his promise, Grim Hagen had given them the run of the city. But there was always one of Hagen's men or some native in uniform to politely assure them that there was little to see down the off-streets. The main squares were a tourist paradise. Beautiful buildings, in all colors and styles. Black marble and silver. Tracings of gold. Clocks, bells, statues, fountains.